Minister, lovely to have you in this morning.
Well, thank you for having me.
Eye-catching announcement, to put it mildly. A fifth of the civil service to go. Explain just in practical terms how and when this is going to happen.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know it sounds eye-catching, but it's just getting back to the civil service that we had in 2016, after Francis Maude had done the job that I now do. And bear in mind, since then, we've taken on extra people for specific tasks, so dealing with the aftermath of Brexit and dealing with COVID. So there's been a reason for the increase, but now we're trying to get back to normal. How can this be done? Well, about up to 38,000 people a year leave the civil service. So the simplest way to do it is to have a freeze on recruitment, which we've done in the Cabinet Office.
Sure, but you can't control where those redundancies come from, can you?
And that's, you're quite right to mention that, because that's a really important part of this, is that we need to have, with the reductions, a very effective learning and development programme so that civil servants whose roles may not be the optimal use of their time can be trained so that they can fulfil other roles within the civil service.
You're the minister responsible, so you will have an idea already, I'm sure. So where exactly will the bulk of these cuts come? Which are the most inefficient government departments?
Well, and arm's-length bodies, because this includes the quangos. And what I've seen within the Cabinet Office, which is where I work, and bear in mind, each Secretary of State will be responsible for his or her own department, is that there is duplication within government. So that you have a communications department, and then you have, within another department, some people doing communications. So it's trying to ensure that you use the resource that you've got rather than duplicating it bit by bit. And therefore, there are many savings that come from that. And then you have to ensure that people are being used as efficiently as possible to do the roles that are necessary. But bear in mind, we took on 91,000 extra. Actually, we took on more than that at the peak to implement COVID and Brexit.
But to be absolutely clear about this, I mean, why isn't this being described as a return to austerity? Because that is what it is, isn't it? Well, significant cuts to departmental budgets, significant cuts to departmental staffing levels. It's austerity by another name.
I don't think it is, because what is being done is getting back to the efficiency levels we had in 2016. That's a perfectly reasonable and sensible...
The job's done with Brexit.
Ambition. The administration, the negotiations, most of the work in relation to Brexit has been completed.
Tell that to Northern Ireland, which we won't come on to in a second.
That's important work, but that's not the same as working out how our laws have evolved and things like that. So the detailed administrative work has primarily been done.
But well over half of all civil servants work in job centres, prisoners, for HMRC. You're not telling me that they're being inefficient in those departments, are you?
No, I'm not. And so it will depend department by department as to what roles are needed. But there will be efficiencies that you can get in some departments through increased automation, increased use of technology, which is something that all sensible businesses will be doing.
But as the Institute for Government points out, anyone who suggests that all of this can come through natural wastage is wrong. There will have to be targeted redundancies in parts of the civil service.
That's not necessarily accurate. That, as I say, up to 38,000 people go every year. So you're talking about a little bit over 2 years of natural wastage. Now, you rightly pointed out they won't all necessarily go in exactly the area that you want them to go, but then within the pool you've got, you will be able to retrain people. So
this is all just ideological, isn't it? I mean, we understand the Conservative desire to see a smaller state. You're certainly not talking, as I understand it, you're one of those voices around the Cabinet table disagreeing with potentially a windfall tax on the energy companies.
Well, the only bit that is ideological is that we should spend taxpayers' money properly and not wastefully. Now, you may call that ideologically. I think that's...
I'm just gently suggesting targeting the public rather than the private sector is ideological.
But do you think that any of your viewers thinks we should waste taxpayers' money and employ people we don't
need to employ? That's a farcical question.
No, it's not actually, because you are saying that this is purely ideological when it's about efficiency. It's about doing things properly. It's about governing effectively and recognising that every penny we take in tax has to come off the backs of people working hard.
You've been in power since 2010. If there's inefficiency in the civil service, it's down to you. Someone else might have been wearing the rosette, but it was the same colour rosette.
But what I'm saying is that we're getting back to the 2016 levels, which we got to through a major efficiency drive, but there were good reasons for taking on extra people.
Yeah, Brexit cost us money and meant that we had to hire more civil servants.
Those reasons have passed.
But Brexit meant that we had to hire more civil servants. The Brexit opportunity we can best describe since 2016
was
expansion of the civil service.
When the extra people were primarily employed post-2016. Boris Johnson was not the Prime Minister, and it could have been done very differently.
As I say, someone else was wearing the rosette back then. I mean, you've been asking people to come back and work in Whitehall. I know that's something that has exercised you. Is there perhaps the suggestion that those people who are unwilling to return to the office could be culled as part of this 90,000 figure?
No, there is a place for working from home. There is a place for hybrid working. But we've seen in the Passport Office and DVLA, well, DVLA had a strike as well, which made things worse, that public services to some people have not been delivered because of working from home. And we've now had the FDA, the Telegraph, has a brilliant story, saying the FDA thinks people should be able to live abroad and work for civil service. I mean, I didn't think that...
I mean, the flip side of that coin is, I mean, you think that services are going to be delivered with fewer people within the civil service?
Yes, I do, because as I've said, we've dealt with some of the issues that led to the increase in numbers, and we can become more efficient. I'm not sure if the FDA was actually calling for offshoring. I'd be very surprised if they wanted British jobs to go overseas. It seems rather a bold and unlikely call by a left-wing union.
I think on that point, many will agree with you. Can we talk just briefly about what's been going on in and around Downing Street? Can you give us a running total of exactly how many fixed penalty notices have now been handed out? I mean, I gently suggest that if you're looking to cut the civil service, you might sack everyone who's received an FPN, but that presumably be quite embarrassing for the Prime Minister.
You'll have to ask the Metropolitan Police how many fixed penalty notices they've issued. That's a matter for them.
Well, you could have asked Downing Street, surely, before coming in this morning.
Well, I read in the papers yesterday it was 100, but that's what I've seen in the newspapers.
OK.
But this is routine reporting for you.
Sure, indeed. Just can we move on to the cost of living crisis? Because quite clearly, it is a major priority for this government. It would be a major priority for any government, of course. In what ways are you experiencing the cost of living crisis right now?
The cost of living crisis is affecting my constituents very significantly.
I've asked you personally.
I'm not going to talk about me personally. My personal.
I've asked the question.
I know you have, and I'm not going to answer it because my personal circumstances are very fortunate, and I think my lecturing people on my own circumstances is not relevant, not helpful. But I do try and help constituents who get in touch with me. And what help can a Member of Parliament give to try and encourage constituents to claim benefits that they are entitled to make the most opportunity to seek the resources that are there. For instance, there's £1 billion that local authorities have to distribute to people who are in particular need, and therefore to try and help my constituents who are struggling. And I'm very well aware, through my postbag and through surgeries, of how difficult people are finding it.
I understand that you're aware of it, but can you genuinely empathise with someone who is... But let me finish. Can you genuinely empathise with someone who is making a choice about whether or not to feed themselves or to keep themselves? The reason I ask, and you will understand this, is that people do sometimes look at you, the three-piece suits, the affectations, the nanny, the Westminster townhouse, the manor house in the countryside, the personal wealth, running perhaps into triple-figure millions.
Well, that's simply not true.
But that is the perception. And they look at you and say, how on earth can this person empathise with me? He's never experienced anything like it.
And that's a very fair question. But one of the great strengths of our political system is that as a constituency MP, you have people come to see you most weeks to discuss how they are living their lives. And you would have to be the most stone-hearted person not to be able to empathise when people come to talk to you about how they are living and what they need.
If you haven't got the same lived experience, if you genuinely haven't been hungry because you can't afford to... Again, I ask this because we heard a little earlier in the week from your colleague Lee Anderson saying something in the Commons that grabbed a lot of attention. I wonder if we can just play it to our viewers now.
There's not this massive use for food banks in this country. We've got generation after generation who cannot cook properly, they can't cook a meal from scratch, they cannot budget. The challenge is there.
What did you make of those comments?
Somebody in my position cannot possibly say things like that. I can't cook myself, and it wouldn't be right for me to lecture people on how to live their lives.
Was it right for Lee Anderson to lecture people on how to live their lives then?
I want to answer the long introductory comments that you made, because I think human nature is about empathising with people who live different lives from oneself. I think that's the whole point of humanity, actually, is that you understand the issues, the difficulties that people face without having to do it for yourself.
Your own colleagues have referred to you, me, as the honourable member for the 18th century.
Yes, and that's great. But human nature is understanding other people's lives, but it's also worth bearing in mind that nobody leads anybody else's life. And therefore, this idea that there is a category of people who automatically understand how other people live and another set who don't. It's simply not true.
All of which is a really long-winded way of
individual.
avoiding answering the question. You know, should Lee Anderson have lectured people on not being able to provide meals for their children at £30 a day?
I would not have said it.
Fair enough. On the Northern Ireland Protocol, when the Prime Minister described a deal as being oven-ready, to what was he referring?
He was referring to a means of leaving the European Union, and that the fact that the agreement itself provides for the updating of the Northern Ireland Protocol. That's in the text, that it will be updated to be made more efficient and more seamless. And that hasn't worked. That hasn't happened. The EU has not delivered that.
But when he described as oven-ready the deal, he was talking about the withdrawal agreement, which included the protocol.
And the protocol included the mechanism for its updating.
What is taking place right now that was not predicted by businesses on both sides of the Irish Sea?
The updating that was provided for within the agreement has not happened properly.
Well, that wall down the Irish Sea, that border down the Irish Sea, which we were told would never happen, was generated by a Northern Ireland Protocol that your government came up with, and your government, in fact, you were directly involved in reducing the amount of time it had for MPs to debate it.
Bear in mind that there was an implementation period, and there was a suspension of elements of the protocol, and that allowed time, had there been good faith on the side of the European Union, to provide the update that the agreement itself expected to take place.
It just doesn't strike me as oven-ready if you have to go back to the drawing board on it.
I think
It's past its sell-by date, unfit for human consumption.
I think you're ignoring the fact. Well, now, if we're going to go for sell-by dates, everything has an ultimate sell-by date. That's not quite the point. The point is that the agreement itself provided for its updating. And that updating has not happened because the EU has not been willing to negotiate in good faith. And
Is it legal to change the protocol unilaterally, as we're intending to do?
There are provisions within the treaty for unilateral changes to the protocol. As we discovered with the EU, it was the EU who invoked Article 16 itself in relation to vaccines during the pandemic.
I wonder if we can just return to where we started and cuts to the civil service. How many advisors did you arrive with this morning? Because it looked like more than 2, 3, 4.
Yes, they don't all work directly for me. They work within the Cabinet Office. 2 work within the Cabinet Office and 2 are my special advisors.
Do you perhaps detect an opportunity for some efficiency savings there?
I cover a very wide area of public policy, but there should be efficiency throughout the civil service.
One final question, and it's on a topic that I think a lot of people are desperately concerned about. Evgeny Lebedev, why did the government not release the information that the House of Commons had compelled it to do so?
Well, I think the government actually has provided more information than it's constitutionally obliged to do. If you look at the first edition of Erskine May, it says that a humble address falls at a prorogation. Now, admittedly, by the time you get to the 12th or 13th edition, which is about 50 years later, Erskine May says a humble address doesn't fall at a prorogation. But by that time, humble addresses had ceased to be part of the House of Commons routine activity.
Why have we not published the intelligence warning about Evgeny Lebedev? Isn't it a simple fact? We know why it hasn't been. We know why it hasn't been published because the security services said perhaps it's not the brightest of ideas to make the son of a former KGB spy who himself was a media baron. A member of the upper house.
Did you look at Lord Bew's evidence to the committee that looked into this?
Yes.
He said that there was no improper pressure brought to bear on him, that everything was handled in the normal way. That seemed to be a pretty convincing answer.
But genuinely, why have we not had that evidence? Why have we not had that?
The government has actually done more than it was constitutionally obliged to do.
Just one final point. This is just breaking news, and I understand that we are delaying you here, but this would be something that you have a view on. Jeffrey Donaldson, DUP leader, has said pretty clearly his party is not going to be supporting the election of a new speaker in Stormont today. What hope is there for Stormont right now?
Well, I think Sir Geoffrey's position has been relatively clear that he believes the protocol is not functioning properly and needs reform. I agree with Sir Geoffrey. I think that's a reasonable position, understandable position for him to take. We cannot allow the functioning of the European Union to undermine the United Kingdom.